He didn't even look embarrassed when he said it. "I don't date widows," he said, stirring his coffee like the conversation had already ended. Too much emotional baggage. "I like a clean start." The woman across from him didn't flinch. No sharp inhale, no defensive smile. She simply nodded once, slowly, as if she'd been expecting the sentence long before he spoke it. "That's fair," she said calmly. "Honesty saves time." That response unsettled him more than anger would have. He had rehearsed explanations in his head, statistics, psychology articles, personal preference, but her quiet acceptance took the power out of his words. He glanced at her hands instead. No ring, no dramatic grief, just steady fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. "So," he added, trying to regain control, "I think we should end this here." She stood up without argument, picked up her bag, and offered a polite nod. "I hope life is as kind to you as you expect it to be." He watched her walk away, annoyed by the strange weight her sentence left behind. He shook it off quickly. Emotions were inefficient. He had built his career by trimming anything unnecessary. By Monday morning, that philosophy was back in place. The corporate floor buzzed with controlled chaos. Deadlines, whispered deals, and carefully crafted smiles filled the air. He thrived here. As a senior operations manager, he was known for two things: results and detachment. People respected him because he didn't mix sentiment with strategy. That morning, an internal audit loomed. A major project, one he'd quietly taken credit for, was under review. If approved, it would mean a promotion. If not, the blame would have to land somewhere else. He walked into the conference room and froze. She was there, not in a cafe chair this time, but at the head of the table, hair neatly tied back. Same calm eyes, same composed posture. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. "This is Maya Khan," the director announced. "She's consulting on our compliance review." Consulting, external, temporary, powerful. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. No recognition crossed her face. Or maybe there was recognition, but no reaction. He told himself that was worse. As the meeting progressed, she asked questions. Precise ones. Questions that cut through. Layers of rehearsed explanations without raising her voice. Every answer he gave felt thinner than the last. She wasn't aggressive. She didn't accuse. She simply listened and wrote. By lunchtime, unease replaced confidence. Over the next few days, strange things began to surface. Numbers didn't align. Approval emails he'd relied on were missing. Decisions he'd assumed were backed by leadership suddenly felt exposed. Someone had moved pieces on the board. And for the first time, he wasn't sure it wasn't him. What bothered him most wasn't fear of consequences. It was the quiet pattern emerging around her. He noticed how junior employees relaxed when she entered the room. How an intern on the verge of tears steadied herself after a brief conversation with Maya. How she stayed late. Reviewing reports no one had asked her to touch. Once he overheard her gently coaching a staff member whose work he had dismissed weeks earlier. "You didn't fail," she said softly. "You weren't protected." That sentence echoed uncomfortably. He began to realize something else too. Files that could have implicated him, easily, cleanly, weren't being escalated. Errors he knew were visible weren't mentioned in meetings. It was as if someone was deliberately slowing the fall. It didn't make sense. He hadn't earned mercy, not from her. Late one evening, he stayed behind, searching through archived folders. The office was nearly empty when he noticed her silhouette across the floor. She was placing documents into a sealed envelope. Her movements deliberate, careful. "You don't need to stay late," he said before he could stop himself. She turned, surprised but composed. "Neither do you." There was a pause, thick, heavy with things unsaid. "I didn't mean what I said," he blurted, immediately regretting how weak it sounded. "At the cafe." "I know," she replied. "You meant exactly what you said." That honesty stung more than accusation. He hesitated. "Then why? Haven't you reported everything?" Her eyes held his for a long moment. "Because punishment isn't the same as accountability." She walked past him then, leaving the envelope behind on the table. He didn't open it. Not yet. That night, guilt pressed harder than fear ever had. He thought about her words. About the intern. About how many times he'd stepped over people without even noticing. The next morning, the betrayal hit. An executive meeting was called. Evidence was presented. Selective evidence. Decisions traced back, not to leadership, but to him. A scapegoat shaped perfectly for corporate survival. As whispers filled the room, he realized the truth too late. Someone else had manipulated the process. And Maya had known. When the meeting ended, his career hung by a thread. He found her in the stairwell. "You knew," he said quietly. "Yes." "You could have saved yourself," he added. "You could have walked away." She met his gaze, calm as ever. "I already lost someone once because others chose silence over kindness. I won't lose myself the same way." Only then did he understand. Her husband hadn't been her weakness. It had been her education. And for the first time in his life, he wondered whether the baggage he feared in others was simply the weight of lessons he'd never learned. By the end of the week, his name no longer carried weight. Emails stopped copying him. Meetings went quiet when he entered. People who once nodded with respect now avoided eye contact, as if association itself carried risk. Corporate betrayal was never loud. It was polite, procedural, and devastatingly efficient. The internal report was released Friday morning. Responsibility for the failed compliance oversight was assigned to him, not the executives who approved shortcuts, not the legal team that ignored warnings. Him, clean, final, signed. He sat alone at his desk long after the floor emptied, staring at the screen. Anger rose first, sharp and familiar. But it collapsed quickly into something worse. Clarity. He saw how easily he had been positioned. How his reputation for emotional detachment made him the perfect fall guy. No allies, no one to defend him. Except one person. He found Maya in the archive room, organizing boxes no one cared about anymore. "It's done," he said quietly. "They pinned it on me." "I know," she replied without looking up. The calm in her voice broke something in him. "You let it happen," he said, not accusing, just exhausted. She finally turned. "No, I redirected it." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the version they released is incomplete," she said. "And temporary." She opened a folder and handed him a document. Not copies, originals, time-stamped approvals, internal memos, recorded objections, names higher than his. "You've been collecting this," he said slowly. "Yes." "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat on a storage box and looked at the floor, as if choosing words carefully. "When my husband died," she said, "everyone called me strong. They said I handled it well. What they didn't see was how many systems failed quietly around us. Paperwork delayed, decisions ignored, people protecting themselves instead of doing what was right." He listened without interrupting. "He didn't die because of one mistake," she continued. "He died because kindness was considered optional. Because no one wanted to take responsibility." Her eyes lifted, steady, clear. "I promised myself I would never be part of that silence again." Understanding settled over him like weight, not pity, respect. "But why protect me?" he asked. "I didn't deserve it." She studied him. "No," she said honestly. "You didn't. But punishment without truth only creates another cycle. I wanted you to see the system from the inside before it crushed you completely." That hurt more than accusation. The following Monday, the board reconvened. This time, Maya spoke. Not emotionally, not dramatically. She laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Timelines, emails, decisions rerouted, warnings dismissed. The room grew colder with every fact. When executives interrupted, she waited. When they deflected, she redirected. She never raised her voice. By the end, the narrative had changed. Not into a rescue story, into an accountability story. His role was reclassified, not erased, but contextualized. Others were named. Consequences followed. Quiet resignations. Policy changes announced with carefully worded statements. He wasn't promoted, but he wasn't destroyed either. After the meeting, she approached him once more. "You'll keep your position," she said, "but the trust will take time." "I know," he replied. She nodded. "That's fair." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the hum of a company pretending nothing had happened. "I judged you," he said finally. "That night, I reduced your life to a label." "Yes." "I was wrong." "Yes." The honesty stung, but it also freed him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I'm not offering it," she said gently. "I'm offering perspective." She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, she said. Kindness isn't about being nice. It's about choosing responsibility when it costs you something. With that, she walked away. Weeks passed. The office felt different, quieter, not because people were afraid, but because they were watching, listening. Systems had shifted. Subtly but unmistakably, so had he. He started noticing things he once ignored. Overworked staff, ideas dismissed too quickly, warnings buried under urgency. He intervened when it mattered, even when it slowed results, not heroically. Consistently, Maya's contract ended without fanfare. No farewell email, no celebration, just absence. On her last day, he found a note on his desk. Some lessons arrive as loss. Others arrive as people we misjudge. Learn from both. He never saw her again, but the change she triggered stayed. Years later, when someone at a meeting made a careless remark about widows, about baggage, about weakness, he interrupted calmly. You don't know what someone has survived, he said. And survival isn't a flaw. No one argued. Because sometimes the strongest kindness isn't what we receive. It's what we learn too late and choose to pass on anyway.